whenever I come to these events, I am definitely the outsider. I am not from the maritime world, and I am from the aviation world. Being an outsider in any industry does give you opportunities to see things differently, and it's been a learning curve like it would be for anyone coming from an outside industry into another one. If I just give you a relative example of what is common, though, I was flying jets in the Air Force. I know what it feels like to put pink bodies into perceived or actual harm, and therefore I understand what it feels like for operators, those of us who are operators and been at sea, for example. I know what that feels like, and I know the tendency to always go for looking after my pink body. That is a human natural reaction. Give you a little example. When I was a very young pilot, first time in the Middle East, I was doing my first combat missions, and I would find myself behind a tanker at night, and I'd been given a very specific task in training, and also for that mission, to take on a certain amount of fuel. Now, it's human tendency to be looking at fuel, because fuel is the bit that keeps you in the air, keeps you safe. And there I was, sitting behind the tanker with 4 other aircraft waiting to join as well, but I was sitting there, hanging on in, taking fuel longer than I should have been. And what did that mean? We'll come to that at the end. We all understand the Indian Ocean, the HRA, and the security implications that have been going on since well before 2008, but it's worth just a quick recap. Because what we want to look at is the Indian Ocean and its current environment versus the history that led up to it. So 2008, we saw the first UN resolution that led to action in the area. It took a while then from several definitions of what a risk area should be, what it should entail, before the HRA was established in 2010. So that's 10 years ago now. We've had, since then, reductions of the risk area as defined to its current, and we can see some diagrams of that if you're not particularly familiar. I'm sure most of the audience is. There's some good things that have come out of this entire 12-year process. And BMP, best management practice, in this instance, has led to a much greater understanding of threats and how to counter them in an operating environment that was not at all familiar for most operators out there up until this started to be implemented. Not just the application, but also the compliance of BMP has had a huge benefit and an understanding in the industry of how to deal with this particular type of security event. Now, we also saw last summer, May onwards, a change in the dynamic in the Indian Ocean regions, particularly in the Straits of Hormuz, and the expansion as a result of the JWC areas. So we have an increased area of nominated areas. Now, the Indian Ocean, as it is, incurs some of the largest security costs in the world. And we're just going to have a look at that in the context of what's been going on. 2011 to 2019, what does this picture show us? It shows us a significant reduction over time in incidents, MARSEC incidents, and non-MARSEC incidents as well, that were reported through the reporting chains in the region. That is quite a demonstrable drop in activity in the region. Just to give ourselves that in context of where this was going on, we can see that it was quite active, and it was quite active in the expected regions, which was the choke points through to the Red Sea, but also spread out across the Somalian coast. So again, as a concept, none of this is new to us, but it's worth seeing and reminding ourselves how active it was back in 2011, and that was not the peak. Things have moved on, though. 2017, a significant drop, and also a restriction in the activity back towards the coastal areas, no longer as far out to sea as it were previously. 2019, last year, we are left with almost a residual activity level. And from 2011, we see a 95% drop in MARSEC incidents. What I'm showing here is there is still a perception of significant security risk in the region, and I just ask you to look at this and make your own assessment as to how that sits with the perception, with the reality of events. Let's look at what happened in 2019 around the choke point. There's about 6 events in there, and none of them were MARSEC. Robberies at anchor, and the one of interest and the one that caught everyone's attention last year, these. Now, the Mesdar, the approach to the Mesdar, the Stena Imperio, the hijacking, well, do we call it hijacking? State action. We call it hijacking, we might call it boarding, we might call it seizure. It doesn't have a MARSEC incident definition that we can use at this point. We see the mining in the harbour of Fujairah. So this resulted in the increasing of the JWC area into the Persian Gulf. But what do we know about this? This is state action, not piracy. They're outside of the HRA. They are within the JWC area, but these are not incidents that can be combated by anti-piracy measures. So do they fall within that or not? The risk profile of this type of event, state action, arguably can be far better understood than crime in terms of piracy, because there are generally, and certainly with Iran, for example, there are logical and well thought out methodologies and intents that you can then translate to risk profiles that you may not be able to do through piracy, which is particularly general. What we do understand as a result of that is that maritime security in this region now is intrinsically linked to the geopolitical situation that's out there. And again, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know in that sense, but I want to put it in context of the security measures that are currently in place. So the increase in the JWC area to the northwest into the Persian Gulf, as you can see, it's quite a large area. The HRA that is reduced sits within it. It used to extend out to the eastern boundary, of course. But in the meantime, we are still incurring significant security costs in the region. What are they? Well, BMP took a long time to get going. It has a training burden and it has an implementation burden. But arguably, it is something that lasts the test of time and can be carried on and applied in the region regardless, or in any region where there is this type of threat. We see the increased premiums, and on top of that, we see the costs of employing armed security teams. With these trends and the understanding of what's really going on in the area, one of the things that we've been trying to illustrate is, are these costs justified within the current threat understanding? There is a tendency, we believe, that people are, or that organizations are still living with a perception of a threat out there that isn't evolving to reflect reality, and that the whole chain of events that leads to an understanding of the threat and also how the industry responds is very slow. However, no one likes to take their seatbelt off. So if I go back to my story of sitting behind the tanker with my little pink body on the line, I didn't want to leave the tanker. I wanted more fuel in there. So I stayed, and I stayed, and I stayed. The gauge was going down. Aircraft, especially fast ones, don't like flying slow, and you have to fly slow behind a tanker, and they don't like it when it's hot, and it's hot in the Middle East. So what was happening was I was burning more fuel than I was taking on. There was a reason the plan was in place, and there was a reason that my training should have let me know that, but human instinct wouldn't let go at that point. Human instinct is powerful and will ignore facts. It'll ignore what it doesn't want to see. So I'm sure we'll get to the discussion part of it in the panel, but that's really all I wanted to highlight at this point, and we can take the discussion forward. Thank you very much.